Welcome to Scoolinary, the online cooking school that transforms people and connects cultures. You will learn with the best chefs in the industry, and you will discover the broadest online catalog of topics related to gastronomy. We publish new courses every week. In our podcast, we have coffee with a chef every week. Each of them will tell us about their experience and their vision for the culinary world to help you better understand this exciting industry. Come on, join us for coffee. So today we are having coffee with Grace Ramirez, TV director, producer turned chef activist, cookbook author, and member of the Chef's Manifesto. Grace is also equally comfortable in front of the camera as a TV personality and model spokesperson for designers that share her values. Food is where it's at for Grace, who's championing Latin flavors as a chef, activist, and educator. Hi, Grace. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for coffee.
Hi, how are you? What a beautiful intro. I'm still like, oh, is that me these days? So thanks for that warm, beautiful introduction. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm really happy to have you here. However, before we begin, I'll point out that your parents are from Venezuela, which produces excellent coffee. However, you're also a trained barista. What's your favorite way to prepare your coffee?
I like a flat white, or a good espresso, and I have a beautiful machine to do that. I grind my own beans. I take coffee very, very seriously. um, yeah, Venezuela has beautiful coffee. Colombia has beautiful coffee. Brazil, Mexico. Um, I think that it was funny because when I lived in New Zealand, um, I realized I was like, what? How do they make such delicious coffee, right? With
Yeah.
our beans. So I was like, I needed to crack that. I mean, this was a very long time ago before this whole coffee craze came into play. But then I was like, I need to crack this down. Like how, what is it? And coffee is something that you don't realize because we just drink it and we don't think about it, but every single part of the process is essential for you to have a good cup of coffee, from obviously from the bean, the farmers, the bean, and then the roasting, and then the person preparing it. Like at every step of the way something can go wrong, for you not to have that perfect cup of coffee.
Yeah, so true. Uh, you also have a really rich biography that could fill an entire Scoolinary episode for real. So please tell us who you are and where you're from, even where you're at now, if you will, so that our listeners have a chance to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm in Aspen, Colorado, and I'm very excited to be curating the culinary. Um, I was studying the culinary vibe and tone of Arraizado, the Latin X House Festival, which is a festival that celebrates, um, you know, Latin greatness. I would say, across all fields, social, education. Um, cookbook authors, TV personalities, producers, directors. So I feel very grateful I feel very grateful to have this opportunity to be here curating, the food that goes into into this festival. Because imagine, like, I am right now in Aspen, and we land and we literally take over 3 kitchens, right?
Wow. Yeah.
The Jerome Hotel, the Aspen Meadows, and the W Hotel, and where we are, so there's like, and usually in an environment like this, they don't have arepas and tequeños and empanadas and huevos rancheros and none of that. So it's really fun. It's really fun to be here, doing what I love the most, surrounded by some exceptional people, to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. And you said earlier, when we were talking earlier, you're knocking out 500 meals a day, or more than that.
Yeah, yeah. We're curating Raizado as a festival that, again, highlights, I think, Latin greatness across the board. And we're curating the breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 days. And I think that for us Latinos, food is it's such a big part of our culture, right? And it really is like the glue to keep families together and bring people together. So I think that, having have had this opportunity, thanks to my very dear friend Monica Ramirez, she's an activist and an amazing force to the community, um, to say, I said to her, like, you cannot have a raizado festival without having some amazing Latin food. It wouldn't make sense for you to having 3 days of this kind of speakers and game changers, and then for you to be eating, some chicken nuggets or pizza.
Yeah.
um, so it was I guess I stood firmly to say, I want breakfast, lunch, and dinner to be an experience for these people that is a celebration of the culture. And I think that represents what I'm doing these days. I'm, like you said, I was someone that grew up in the entertainment industry
Hmm.
since very young. My family, worked across the whole entertainment industry. My aunt was represent artists for soap operas. My uncle will work at an advertising agency. My other uncle was a singer. My other uncle was a performer. So I think that having, but then my grandfather was a general to the Venezuelan Air Force and a very political figure in the Venezuelan democracy. So I think that kind of represents. But then my grandmother was an amazing cook and chef, and everyone
Yeah.
on my grandmother's side, they're great cooks. So I think that represents who I am, right?
Yeah.
Passionate chef, first and foremost, but a political figure, or let's not say a political figure, but an activist,
Yeah.
a very active activist.
You know what? And
um,
I'm, if I could jump in right there,
yeah,
because you have a great example of how you were an activist, but kind of understated or humble, I should say. Because if people ever needed proof that actions speak louder than words, when Hurricane Maria tore through Puerto Rico in 2017, what you did next was really interesting. You hopped on the first plane that would take you there to help with recovery efforts. And so, can you walk us through that and tell us what happened next?
yeah. Yeah, I think that exactly what you're saying. For me, actions have always spoken louder than words. So I sit in a lot of these tables where we can talk forever about what is going on in the world and the problems and all that stuff. But you really have to get to work, right? And I think that is something that I take very seriously. When Maria happened, I was not connected to World Central Kitchen yet, but I was such a fan of what Chef Jose Andres does and what World Central Kitchen does. I'm an ambassador for them. Um, I still work with them, and depending on the projects, because now we have just a lot going on. But I am such a fan of Jose, and I think that when I saw what he was did in Haiti, and then exactly when Maria happened, what Jose did what Jose does. He hopped up. He got there before me. He got there
Yeah.
before me. But I was looking for him, and I couldn't get a hold of Jose, and I didn't have. I had one lead to get to him, which is Chef Sam Cass, which was former. Sam is the chef to. He was a chef to the Obamas,
Yeah.
and he was giving a talk that he was supposed to give a talk with Jose at the New York Food and Wine. So I showed up and I said, obviously Jose was not there. He was in Puerto Rico. But I said to Sam, how can I get to Jose? And he goes, go show up in Puerto Rico. And and I think that that's kind of like how my life has been, right? I I'll figure it out and I'll show up. And I think when you have that mentality and that resilience of one door shuts but another one will open, and that's when magic happens. And I think that that's when life shows you. It's like, okay, I showed up, and then right there I met a chef who knew where Jose was, and then I got to work with World Center Kitchen at El Plato Caliente, and I started cooking. I started cooking in the mountains for like 2,000 people a day. I was there for like a month, and it
Wow.
was rough. I mean, I didn't shower for days. It sounds gross, but like, I would wash my hands very well, but just kept cooking, and that was a turning point in my life, because also the resilience and the vibe and the positivity and the attitude of the Puerto Rican community is something that really inspired me. My first cousin is from Puerto Rico. Her mom is from Puerto Rico. So I grew up going to the island. I live in New York. I'm a New Yorker. So the Puerto Rican community is well, the Latin community in general is very dear to me. But, Puerto Rico is like my people. So I'm like, to have, I was there and I was cooking and I was like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And they were like, well, we have no water, but we have a roof. We don't have a roof, but we have water.
Huh.
We don't have roof or a water, but we have family. And they would always look at the glass half full. And that was something that, I was going through a very dark period in my life at that moment. My grandmother had just passed. And I had kind of like lost my North Star. And that kind of attitude just kept me going. It's like, what are you focusing on? Is the glass half full or half empty? And I think that that's something that I took from that trip. um First of all, when you're on your darkest moments, when you're looking at your own belly button and you're feeling very sorry for yourself, go out and give. And because by giving you'll find yourself, and by giving you'll find joy, and by giving you realize all the little blessings that you have in your life that you're not really looking at. And then you will quickly shift your narrative and shift your focus into, oh, the glass is not half empty, it is half full, and things will get better. So that was something that I took from that period and that time in Puerto Rico.
That's a great piece of advice. Go out and give. There you have it.
Yep.
Now, you are a trained chef. You went to culinary school. And so when you went to Puerto Rico, where was that in your culinary timeline?
I had finished culinary school, and then I had gone to New Zealand for 4 years.
Mhm.
So, I was a director, producer turned chef. So I did culinary school, the French Culinary Institute, later on in my life. But then I worked for almost 3 years at Italy in New York. It's like a food hall of Italian foods, and I was the assistant to the executive chef there. Then I went to New Zealand for 4 years, where um, I taught cooking classes. I worked with a nonprofit called the Garden to Table program, where we taught kids how to grow, harvest, and cook their own foods. Mind you, I was a very city girl up to that time, and the kids were teaching me more than I was teaching them of how food grew. I was teaching them how to cook, but they were teaching me how strawberries grew, how carrots grew from the ground. I remember seeing the first time I saw a carrot coming out of the ground. I was like, oh my god! I don't know. I had this notion that a carrot grew from a tree. I mean, it was pretty sad, but I really didn't. I mean, I had a mango tree in my backyard in Venezuela, and an avocado tree, but I didn't know a lot of like how stuff looked like when it was growing from a seed to something tangible and physical that you can eat.
Yeah.
So it was a big learning process for me that I loved, because I understood seasonality. I understood how food grew. I understood how where food came from. I really understood the whole garden to table approach and mentality. So that completely shaped me, who I was, and my food philosophy as a chef. So, that period was very important to me. I taught cooking classes. I got very involved in this nonprofit, and then I did this big show that called My Kitchen Rules, which was ironic because the creators of My Kitchen Rules were the producers, creators of MasterChef. So
Oh.
I had done MasterChef here in America,
Mhm.
and I had gotten kicked out, and it was a big turning point in my career because I felt very sorry for
Yeah.
myself. I was a MasterChef contestant. that I was sure I was going to win, and then I didn't, and I thought my life was over. But Gordon Ramsay said to me, you should do culinary school. And he was like, you should do culinary school and come back because you seem very passionate about this. And I was like, no, I can't afford to do culinary school. I'm still in debt from my first career. How am I going to have a second career? But but that really got me thinking. I was like, well, there was two scholarships that will they will give a year in the French Culinary Institute, and I said, well, I'll go after one of them. And I did. So I got a scholarship,
Oh,
and and I was able to go to culinary school and work in a New York kitchen, and worked very, very hard. I was like, I would cry every day and say, "What am I doing?" I went from this glam kind of life of producing, directing shows, to working in a New York kitchen, which was I was like, "Oh my god, what am I doing?" But it's worked out. I think that it is, for careers changers out there. It takes a minute. I think that first of all is making the decision of changing careers, which is a very hard one, and second of all is just sticking to it. I stuck to it. I was like, I want to do this. Having a chef coat on is for me, it's like every time I put my chef coat, I'm like, this is where I belong. And I think first and foremost, I'm a cook at heart, and I think everything comes out of that. And having an understanding of the responsibility of what it means to be a cook and to run a kitchen.
yeah. Would
And
you
yeah,
say
now
would you say that Chef Ramsay perhaps saw something in you that maybe you didn't see in yourself? It just needed maybe a little sharpening, a little refining, and a little polishing, and then you could take off from there. And you have. I'll have to point out. But yeah, my question is: do you think you had talents that were kind of undiscovered by yourself?
100%. I think that's why I always say mentorship and surrounding yourself with people that uplift you, and that, uh, well, first, I have to say, I think there's two very important parts to this question. First of all, you have to be your most enthusiastic cheerleader, because nobody is going to believe in you like you have to believe in yourself, because the one who falls and that has to get back up is you. Nobody can do that for you, right? No matter, even if you have 100 people cheering for you and believing in you, if you don't get back up and if you don't believe in yourself, you are you.
Yeah,
So that's the first part, right? Because, you know how many times in life has someone told you you can do it, or love yourself, and but if you are not really believing it, and if you're not really walking that path yourself, nobody can do that for you. So that is number one. And number two is, I always say, you are going to have out there so many people telling you that you can't do it, or that, who do you think you are, or what are you talking about, that's impossible, or whatever. You're going to have a lot of that, but you're also going to have a lot of people that are rooting for you and that believe in you. And I think for me, three key people that said something exactly at the right time that I needed to hear and that gave me the strength to keep going was, one, Jennifer Lopez. When I interviewed her at MTV, you know her power, her strength, and I was interviewing her during El Cantante. She had just released that movie, and I said, how do you deal with stereotypes? And she goes, I don't believe in stereotypes. I don't have that chip on my shoulder. And my agents will say to me, my manager would say to me, we're putting you for this Latina role, and we're putting you out for this other Latina role. And she would say, no, send me to everything. I am the new American girl.
hmm, yeah,
Don't just send me to get Latina roles. And I think that her believing in herself, that she is, well, now look who she is. She's everything. But that, and she said, she looked at me in the eyes and she says, you're just like me. I'm a girl from the Bronx who's worked really hard. And if you work hard enough, something will always happen. And think about that. If you work hard enough, something will always happen. And and that interview was life changing for me because it was coming from someone who was already very successful, and I had studied and seen her trajectory. And remember, back then, the only two people that looked anything like me was Shakira and Jennifer. Um, and so, I would interview her both a lot, but Jennifer had this very clear, being a New Yorker, um, way of looking at things that I was like, wow, that's very inspiring. And then, I worked with Chef Bobby Flay, and Bobby taught me that, um, you know, to see that he runs an empire, right?
Yeah.
And he's a chef. So that was also very inspiring for me to see him, the kind of passionate chef he is, but he's just as passionate as in the kitchen as he is as a businessman. And that was something like a veil lifted over my eyes. I was like, oh wait, this, you can have a lot of different businesses and be a chef.
Yeah.
So, but,
Okay.
he has a production company, he has his restaurants, he has his businesses. So that was, and when I was telling him about what I wanted to do, funny enough, he said to me, he goes, "Go be the J Lo of cooking." Yeah, and I thought that was interesting because he never knew about me interviewing Jennifer. So I was like, "Well, that's adorable that you think I look anything like Jennifer." Um, but I understood what he said. He meant just like, go do your thing, go be that Latina, um, that that is out there cooking and doing her thing. And back then, you know, there was Ingrid Hoffman. She's been a very inspiring, dear friend to me. But there was not a lot of us that out there, cooking and doing our thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think between Jennifer Lopez, um, Bobby Flay, and then Gordon Ramsay saying to me, kicking me out of the show and saying, "Do culinary school." That those three key moments, I was like, okay, I can do this, kind of thing. So I feel very fortunate that they came from who they came from. But mentors can come from anywhere.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's a little bit of a fine, or maybe I should ask you, is it a little bit of a fine line between being a Latina and saying the opportunities are open for me everywhere, but I really want to lift up my culture and put that at the forefront?
I have a social responsibility with my culture. Like there's no, and I'm very proud of that. Like when I started in the kitchen, I was the only female in the kitchen that spoke English and Spanish that could communicate clearly with my executive chef and with my line and my prep cooks. So, um, I understood that I had a social responsibility to make the culture feel proud of who we are and lift them up. Right? We're not less because we're line cooks or prep cooks. Um, our culture is very rich, and we can indeed have those executive chef positions. um, it's just a matter of us believing in ourselves, right, and believing of what we have to offer.
Yeah.
So I'm all about that, and I think that, you know I am so proud to be Latina. I grew up in Miami, and I've been 17 years in New York, and I was born in Miami. And I remember that, none of my friends that were Latinos spoke Spanish. And their parents were, from all kinds of different nationalities, but they didn't teach their children to speak Spanish because
Hmm.
they felt like to assimilate. And my mom was the opposite. My mom was just like, oh, no, 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 no. En la casa hablamos español. Like at home we speak Spanish. And man, we need to be proud of who we are and where we came from. And our culture and our heritage is amazing, and it's so rich. And I will go back home to Venezuela every summer. And then when my mom my mom has lived in Mexico for a very long time. I visit her all the time, and it's true. It was like, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We are amazing. And my mom has lived in Brazil, in Colombia, in my stepfather's from Peru. She's lived in Chile, in Argentina. They live half of the year in Uruguay. So I got to travel all over Latin America, and I understood the complexity and the richness of our culture. And I became like obsessed of like that that pride that we feel in our countries. We need to feel that pride, and when we're here in the States, right?
Yeah.
Because we are about to become the biggest minority in the country,
Mhm.
right? So but if we don't understand our power and are not proud of who we are, then we are not going to change things, the landscape in opportunities and socioeconomic power that we have. So that's why I'm so passionate about celebrating culture, lifting our culture, but really going deep into like workforce development, training, and mentorship, because we need to lift our community up.
So Latin flavors are part of the culture that you referenced. As we mentioned in the introduction, you teach a course called Latin Flavors for Scoolinary. And I was wondering if you could take us through the range of Latin flavors and perhaps explain what makes them Latin.
Well, I mean, first of all, Latin flavors are the best. I it's very complex because when we're talking about Latin flavors, for me, is from Mexico to Patagonia, right? So we are, the thing is, um I'm very conscious of the complexity of our cultures, right? But the thing is, we can talk about Latin flavors in each country of Latin America, and then we can talk about Latin flavors when they make their way into the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, or where we take, my first cookbook, La Latina, I launched it in New Zealand, and then made its way to New Zealand, Australia, the UK. So I think La Latina was, um, it's a cookbook that said, okay, these are my roots, right? This is what I crave. Or when I land in Mexico, I ask for huevos divorciados. When I land in Chile, I ask for a pastel de choclo. When I'm in Venezuela, I ask my grandparents for a pabellon. So these are the flavors I crave that are Latin. My stepfather's from Peru, so he taught me how to make ceviche and causa and lomo saltado. So these are the flavors I grew up having, right? And that I crave. And how can I modernize the technique and make them accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world, right? And it was funny because we're very protective of our culture, right? So I heard a lot of fights about who makes the best arroz con pollo. Is it Cubans? Is it Venezuelans? Is it
Yeah.
Costa Ricans? Is it, no, my mom makes the best arroz con pollo. My mom makes the best tamales. My grandmother makes. We can get into a lot of arguments into who makes the best what, and you're always going to hear someone having a bite of whatever I make. And yeah, but my grandmother's recipe is more authentic, and my aunt's recipe. And yes, of course, because you grew up with those nostalgic flavors, and you grew up having it the way your family has it. However, I my quote unquote job, and where I'm passionate and where I've been trying, is to again make that food accessible for anyone, anywhere. So if you're in New Zealand and you want to cook some chicken tinga, here's how you can do it, right? Or you want to make a carne mechada, shredded beef from Venezuela, or ropa vieja, here's how you can replicate it, that you will get that fix of all those beautiful flavors. But trying to make it accessible for people, because the other thing is, Latinos, we're very complicated. Somos complicados,
Yeah.
like every time I would do research for the book, and I would go to my friends, um grandmother's homes, and they will teach me how to make a dish. It will take 4 to 6 hours. And I was like, there's no way in this modern world I can tell anyone, maybe a yacas that you make once a year, to sit there and make a recipe for 6 hours. It's just not going to do it. So I was like, okay, electric pressure cooker. Here's how you cut corners. Here's how you could do this. Here's another hack. Here's how you can do it in half an hour.
Yeah.
It's and you're going to get that fix. It's obviously not going to be exactly the same as if grandmother made it for 12 hours, but you're not going to miss a ton of flavor and you're not going to miss that nostalgia. You're going to feel warm and fuzzy and it's going to be delicious. So yeah, Latin flavors are a very complex subject for me, but where I stand is I needed to modernize modernize it and make it accessible not only for La Latina the cookbook, but for La Latina Cocina the concept that I have in partnership with Aramark, which lives in 85 universities across the country,
Oh,
where kids are, at different schools everywhere in the United States, having my grandmother's beans, having, that chicken tinga that I learned how to make in Mexico, and that arroz rojo and plantains and that choripan that my Argentinian friends, showed me how to do with that beautiful chimichurri. So I think that is something that that I'm very proud of. That we need to, if we want to grow and scale, and if we want to think about, let me say that again. If we want to think about growth, scale, and impact when it comes to the Latino culture, we need to think bigger and more accessible, and it doesn't mean that you're going to lose authenticity and flavor, but I think that we're now in a good spot where I'm proud to say that La Latina Cocina lives in 85 universities across the country, and where kids are eating my grandmother's beans, um, my grandmother's shredded beef, the chicken tinga I learned how to make in Mexico, the chimichurri that my friends taught me how to make in Argentina with that beautiful choripan,
mm.
and I think that that's something that I feel very proud of what we've accomplished, because imagine, like, there's thousands of of students across the nation eating authentic Latin flavors, and for Latino kids, they feel right at home, and for non-Latino kids, they're being well fed.
Gosh, yeah, and you're certainly no stranger to feeding large crowds and kind of, uh, yeah, getting Latin flavors out there as kind of. Would you agree? Kind of entering more into the mainstream.
100%. I think that is the goal, right? I think that, first of all, differentiating, um, what and there's nothing wrong with Tex-Mex food. There's nothing wrong with, remember the proximity of the border, proximity between, you know Texas, Mexico, and but, like, also there's Tex-Mex food, which I love a good Tex-Mex food, but then there's also Latin food, right?
Yes.
That I think that's where I've been focusing on, that is not just Mexican food, which, my heart is a quarter Mexican. My mom lives in Mexico. Um, eh, I've been going to Mexico my whole life. My uncles have lived there, um, and I'm all about celebrating Mexican flavors, but also kind of saying, in the United States, as Latinos, here's a bit about who we are. That So I've been trying to kind of build this umbrella that represents us all, who the new American girl and the new American guy who is of Latino roots.
Yeah, and to strengthen that vision, if you will, if I'm not mistaken, you're involved in various initiatives to elevate the perception of Latino culture. And I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could tell us a bit about some of your projects that you're working on.
Yeah. I think that, first of all, we're very proud of what we built with La Latina Cocina in partnership with Aramark and universities across the country, right? That is the first time anybody has that level of representation at that scale across the board. So that is a first. Like there was not no proper representation at that scale, you know, in any schools in the country, right? So
Hmm.
now we're in 85
Wow.
schools across the country. So that's one. Then, I am part of the Chef Council of New York City, appointed by Mayor Adams, which it's all under wellness in the schools. We are trying to bring in more culturally appropriate foods into the New York City school system, public school system. So, and then I'm working with um, a series of schools with the Department of Education, co-op techs, which are about, yes, bringing more cultural representation in their culinary curriculum. So bringing more flavors that represent their culture, um, and also elevating it, right? So now it's all about, Instagram and TikTok. So how do you make a, a, a taco look amazing for the gram, and how do you make, whatever your tres leches that you want to go out and sell, um, and that it looks beautiful and that you can start a business. So I think that I am looking at it in a holistic way of teaching people not only how to cook and training them how to cook our food, but also elevating it and making it look delicious and scalable and sellable and all that. So yeah, it's some very exciting big projects um, that we have going on that I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, and those sound like some lucky kids as well. I'm a little envious. You're also a member of the Chef's Manifesto, which has a big role in achieving several of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals set forth by the United Nations, which also touches a little bit upon your own activism. It's a wonderful organization, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely. I think that, being part of the Chef's Manifesto is something that I encourage everyone. I'm a chef partner with the UN, but anyone can join our cause. And it's about, what I love about the Chef Manifesto is that it gives you like a little toolkit um, to say, what kind of practices am I following in my business, in my food business, right? And is there little tweaks that I can do to make my business um, more careful, right? To care for the planet, to care for the environment, to care. What are my values, right? It makes you. I think that toolkit makes you do a little checklist of your values and where your business stands. And anybody can join. And right now we have a big campaign. You can check it out at Chef Grace Ramirez or at Chef's Manifesto. And it's all about beans is how. So incorporating more beans into your menus, into your businesses. Why? Because beans are such a sustainable source of protein. And so we have that campaign going on, which I'm advocating for, because we need to take this food crisis seriously. Um, Otherwise, if each one of us as a chef uh, does not take responsibility into making small changes in our industry, um, where's our food coming from, where our fish is coming from, where our meat's coming from, vegetables, are we seasonality, are we thinking about all these things? If we're not thinking about it, we better start thinking about it, because um, we are we're having a food crisis, and it's only going to keep getting worse if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, and you said actually in a previous interview that sustainability is the future, and I think you've just spoken a little bit now about how some of the ways that everyday cooks and consumers can engage in sustainable food practices, whether as consumers or as people who produce food. How do you specifically express sustainability through your own cooking?
Well, I think at this point now, I sustainability and the chef's manifesto's values are incorporated into everything I do, and I think that you have to, um, as a business owner, as a chef, you have to know what you're standing for, right? And I I don't cook anything that is not seasonal. I don't cook anything that is not, when I'm thinking about events, when I'm thinking about anything I do, it's okay, what is available, what is local, right? Um, I am not that chef who wants to uh, bring, you know, a fish from Greece to do an event here in Aspen, right? So
Sure.
I'm always thinking about that, right? I have to make very conscious choices. Sometimes it's not easy because literally there's nothing for me to do. I mean, I'm not saying I do it 100% of the time, but wherever I can, however I can, I just don't do um, events, or even right now at the scale that I'm working with in partnership with Aramark, I have said no to several products because the companies that are behind the products are not doing things right.
Mhm.
So, um, so I make very conscious choices to stick to what I believe in. And if you're not following good practice, and if you are not um, a good company, or if not you're not good people, and if you're not doing good to the planet, then I can't support you or back you up or promote you. So that is something that I have had to say a lot of no's to a lot of opportunities, because the company or the product doesn't it doesn't align with my values. And I think that is, we have to have, we as consumers and chefs and leaders, we have to know the power we have, right? As you have to be a conscious consumer, right?
Mhm.
Ask yourself, when you go to the supermarket, am I getting strawberries from Chile? Are they in the middle of winter? Am I getting, I mean, yes, we're supporting Chile, but what is local and available to you is what you should be supporting, right?
Yeah.
And get those strawberries or get those blueberries, and then if you love them so much, then make jams, in the summer, and then keep them throughout the rest of the seasons. But I think that especially the American consumer it's a very spoiled one, and it wants everything they want when they want it. And we have to, as educators, as chefs, teach the consumer that that's not necessarily the best thing for the planet,
Yeah.
and the best thing, because like when you're eating out of season something that comes from the other side of the planet, think about that, think what it does, carbon footprint, think about the all the pesticides and things that go in it, and preservatives that have gone into that product to be able to hold for it to get to you. So I think that we have to start connecting the dots. If something comes from very far away, think about the process.
Yeah. And a question, you just sparked a question. Given the inequities in the world, and for example, the American consumer is generally pretty entitled to what they want when they want it. If you could design the world's cuisine in the near future, what would that look like to you?
Well, I think it's about local and seasonality, right? Like, what are we focusing on, what is available to you locally
Yeah.
and seasonally, and that goes across the board. So from, if you have, what do you have that is available to you nearby, right? And I think that is, but the problem is, yeah, the world wants what they want, and they want, in the you want your piece of Japanese wagyu beef on the other side of the planet, and you want your fish from Greece when you're on the other opposite side of the planet.
Yeah.
So and you want that avocado when it's not in season. So that's the problem. Like so and obviously because the demand is there, it's a vicious cycle
Hmm.
that it's going to take a minute, but to make some changes, but we need to gradually make some changes. And I'm not saying that you can have your wagyu beef from Japan, um, but think about how many times you're having that, right?
Yeah.
Think about, we just need to become more conscious of what we're eating and ask more questions and really become more educated and start connecting the dots. That's what I'm encouraging people. I'm not an extremist. I understand it's hard. I understand eating local, organic. It's very expensive. I understand the American landscape. I understand the food deserts that exist throughout the country. I know it's not easy. I'm not oblivious to that. I'm not a chef who's like, oh, just eat from the garden and you know and eat, go to your farmer's market. Eating from the farmer's market is very expensive.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive, and it's a luxury in our country, opposite to other countries, right? You go in Venezuela to your farmer's market, you go in Mexico to the farmer's market, everything is cheaper. Not in the States. The farmer's market is a luxury. And so for the people who can, yes, go to the farmers market, support local economy, support that farmer, that fisherman, and support locally as much as you can. But for those who can't afford it, I understand that is tough. But I think we can. That's why I'm so passionate about education, because when the education system makes you understand more about seasonality and what is good for you and what is nourishing for your body, and you can make more conscious choices, even if you're on a food desert. But it's hard. I don't have all the answers, and that keeps me awake. These topics keep me awake at night, of because I understand the complexity of the situation,
Hmm.
and not that many people again have access. So um it's a very complex subject, but I think that bottom line is, think globally, act locally. And as cliche as that sounds, we can only be but responsible for ourselves and the choices we make in each moment. And that is where my responsibility, each one of us has a responsibility, right? And we can only be but responsible for ourselves and our community.
This episode has been full of life lessons. So I'm going to go back and listen to it again and become enlightened. I know you have 500 or more hungry diners to get back to. So I had just one more question. Who would you recommend for an episode of this podcast related to the culinary world?
Oh, I have so many women I want to recommend for this. I would say, Lynette Marrero. She's a mixologist, but she's someone who is such a force of nature, changing the landscape of you know of women in the industry in general. And also she runs a nonprofit called Speed Rack, that it's a female bartending competition that the profits go to um, breast cancer. And Lynette is a force of nature, and Lynette Marrero is someone that I love and I admire, and she's changing the way um, women are in the hospitality industry. There's Chef Valerie Chang. She's young and she's passionate, and she's a firecracker from Peru, who's amazing chef in out of Miami with Peruvian descent. Then there's Michelle Bernstein that I love. Um, she's also amazing. Nicole Fonseca, Filipino New Yorker, now killing it in Miami. So there's just too many women that there's Ingrid Hoffman that I love and admire, that I could just keep going. These are women that I really respect and I'm such a fan of.
Great. Thank you. Those are a lot of great leads to go on. Thank you so much. Hey, Grace, thanks a ton for joining me for coffee today. It's been really, really informative, really insightful, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, I thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for the cafecito.
If you like this episode, don't miss an episode by becoming a member. We're waiting for you each week with more guests. We're on all podcast platforms. Just search for Coffee with Scoolinary. We're also waiting for you at our website and on our social networks, where you can get to know all our courses and teachers.